Let me begin by saying that it's a pleasure to be with you today. Indeed, it's a pleasure for me to be anywhere today, but especially communicating in this way to those whose work helped to save my life. I should also warn you that this remains a highly emotional subject for me, hence the proximity of a supply of Kleenex. As an academic historian and public servant, I am more accustomed to speaking to scholars and students on subjects of my own expertise. That is, I usually know more about the topic than my audience. This occasion, by contrast, is a bit daunting, as I am expected to talk to you about a trauma and its treatment. However, I have been assured by those involved in the stroke strategy and by my neurologist, Dr. Mike Sharma, that my perspective on stroke, treatment, and recovery as a victim or patient might be valuable for those who work in this field. Before I begin, I should underline one aspect of my experience which will be familiar to most of you. As my family will attest, the victim of a stroke often makes a very poor witness or authority on the event itself. That is not simply owing to a tendency of stroke victims to disbelieve or to deny what is happening, but also because one of the merciful aspects of a stroke, at least of the kind that I experienced, is that the victim is often unconscious or unaware of the trauma and especially of the possible severity. Rather than have you denounce me as a fraud for commenting about what I could not have known, however, I should stress that most of what I will recount about the stroke itself has been reconstructed from conversations with my wife, Kathy Giles, and our daughters, Anna and Sarah, who were all too aware, especially Kathy and Anna, of what was going on. For my part, my personal recollections could best be compared to an attempt to understand a full-length film from scattered stills, not necessarily organized in the correct order, as I have learned, with the inevitable result that my flawed memory has been corrected by the women in my life, an experience familiar to any father of daughters. The medical aspects of what happened we have all learned from the neurologists and other physicians involved at the time and after. Perhaps I should explain what happened when I had my stroke on Thursday, the 28th of August of 2008, before the Labor Day long weekend. I had taken a day off work and rented a car to help my older daughter Anna return to Kingston and move into a house here that she would be sharing with friends for her second year at Queen's University. Yes, it was on the edge of the notorious student ghetto, whose location would be a fortunate factor in my experience. My intention was to help clean up the basement with a shop vac and fix the lock on the front door before returning to Ottawa, where our other daughter, Sarah, was staying. Kathy's plan was to come down after work and then stay overnight with Anna. As one of many fortunate developments, Kathy arrived before I left. After I had finished in the basement, I was about to leave when I had a sneezing fit, something to which I had been prone as an adult, then stumbled, or so I thought, over a canvas bag of tools which I had left in the narrow hall. Kathy recognized, as did Anna, that I had collapsed rather than stumbled, in spite of my attempts to claim otherwise. Kathy immediately told Anna, "Call 911," and grabbed my belt to halt my resumed attempt to exit. As Anna spoke to the dispatcher, she and Kathy put me through various tests, as instructed, to verify what had happened, though both suspected that it was a stroke. Kathy's great-aunt had suffered a stroke, and Anna had taken the National Life-Saving course, so that both were aware of the symptoms. Anna interrupted the call at the dispatcher's suggestion to make a few more tests, with the assurance that she would get through immediately when she called back. I was seated beside Anna, who shifted position to determine whether I could remain upright on my own. However, when she moved, I slid sideways. Anna then helped ease me to a safe position lying on the floor on my side so that I would not choke. Meanwhile, my speech had become slurred, and it was hard for Kathy and Anna to understand me, though my recollection is one of frustration that what I thought I was saying clearly was not understood, including my insistence, when Anna told the dispatcher that my dad has collapsed, that I did not collapse, I fell. Kathy noticed that my left side, including the left side of my face, had become paralyzed or flaccid, and that I needed to move my whole head to see anything. Anna placed her hand inside my left hand and asked me to squeeze it. There was no effect, and then I reached over with my right hand to do it. As Anna told me later, that really scared her, though she kept up a brave front. When Anna resumed her call to 911, she asked the dispatcher how long the ambulance would be, and she was told that it should be turning the corner into your street now, which it was. The fact that Anna's house was so close to the ambulance station and to Kingston General Hospital certainly made a major difference to my prospects. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was largely unaware of what was happening. Certainly I have almost no memory of that stage. I know from Kathy and Anna that the paramedics were very careful, sympathetic, and reassuring, though Anna admitted later that she was so upset by what was happening that she wondered why they were not rushing everything. I was transferred to a rolling chair and maneuvered down a narrow hall, made narrower no doubt by student debris, then onto a stretcher and finally into the ambulance, where I was accompanied by Kathy. Anna took our car and followed us to the hospital, which was brave of her as she was distraught. Kathy and Anna both told me later that at this point they believed I was going to die, in spite of the swift and effective response. The paramedics reassured Kathy during the brief journey to the hospital that I would get the best care possible, and as it turns out, they were right. Because of the speed with which my trauma was identified and the proximity to the hospital, I arrived at admission at emergency services within half an hour of the stroke. There had been an earlier patient with a possible stroke, so that the neurologist, Dr. Stuart Reed, was already there, and I was sent immediately to have a CT scan angiogram. The initial scan revealed a grim picture. About half of my brain was potentially affected by the clot which had lodged there. And so, after the neurologist had informed Kathy and discussed the options with her, it was decided to administer the clot buster, tPA. Poor Kathy and Anna had to contend with understandable questions about whether or not I had a living will and whether or not I would want to be kept alive by machines should that prove necessary. There was also a further complication. Apparently, the clot that precipitated the stroke was part of a clot in my carotid artery. The arterial wall had dissected, either as a result of a congenital weakness or an earlier trauma. We still do not know what or when. That meant that there was a risk that the artery might rupture, sorry for any non-medical language, and that the damage to my brain could be much worse. Again, as before, the options were clearly explained to Kathy so that she could make an informed choice in my best interests and understanding my likely attitude. She decided that it was better to go ahead with administering tPA with a chance of recovery than to suspend it and the likelihood of long-term disability or impairment and convalescence. That decision not only saved my life, but also restored my quality of life. I should also mention that, throughout this ordeal, Anna kept Kathy and I company. At one point, in the middle of this awful night, she spoke to encourage me to fight this, as she put it. "You're doing great, Daddy. I'm so very proud of you." To which I replied, very slowly and deliberately and rather indistinctly, "I have always been proud of you, Anna." She told me later that it upset her to think that she would hear that before I died, but that Sarah might never hear me say that about her. There were times when Anna was alone, and I would also like to say how well she and Kathy were treated by all of the hospital staff. At one point, a security guard noticed how distraught Anna was and asked her whether she would like a drink of water. When she replied yes, he went off to get her one. By the time he returned, she had been allowed inside, and he tracked her down with the water and a box of Kleenex. The guards also admitted Anna's close friend and ours, Kelty Gale, who had been tracked down during the night by her mother, Carol, so that Anna had personal support as well. Meanwhile, a very dear friend of ours from Wakefield in Quebec had picked up Sarah at home and driven her to Kingston in the middle of the night. As soon as Sarah said why she was there, one of the guards took her directly to Kathy and Anna. Overnight, Thursday and Friday morning, Kathy noticed signs that my condition was improving, though the overall impression for Sarah and Anna was still pretty devastating. Even Kathy recalled that I seemed unjustifiably pleased with my responses to the various questions and tests to ascertain function, when she could see that I was not performing at all well on my left side. Though I was often tired during Friday, Kathy was sure by then that I would live, though Anna and Sarah were less certain. At one point, Anna worried when I did not respond to all of the questions posed by one of the nurses. Though the nurse recognized my fatigue and asked whether I was just too tired to answer, to which I lifted my eyebrows in what passed for an affirmative response. I have mentioned the nursing staff in passing as my interrogators, but I should stress that throughout this ordeal, they were attentive, compassionate, helpful, and remarkably calm and professional, a tremendous source of reassurance for me and for my family. They also displayed an engaging sense of humor about what was, for all of us, an extraordinary and terrifying experience. That positive spirit itself helped to see us through it. Sarah told me later that she knew I was getting better when I became sarcastic with one of the nurses. Apparently, as she approached to ask the familiar roster of questions, I anticipated her with, "Your name is Naomi. It is August 2008. Today is Friday. I am in Kingston General Hospital in Kingston, and they tell me that I have had a stroke." Note the lingering sense of denial by the patient of what had happened, in spite of all evidence to the contrary. Naomi took this in stride, awarded me 100% on the verbal test, and proceeded to poke and jab me to determine my physical responses, which scored lower but still better than the night before. For me, the breakthrough in awareness took place 36 hours after the stroke, on Saturday, not long after 8 in the morning, when the neurologist who had attended me when I was admitted to emergency and who had directed my treatment, Dr. Reed, came to visit me. By then, we were able to have a detailed conversation about what had happened. At some point, as we talked, it dawned on me that this talk meant that I was recovering well. Dr. Reed then talked about the remarkable contrast between the pre- and post-treatment CT scans. To my own delight, and that of my family, he used distinctly non-medical language to assess my condition. "Your recovery is nothing short of miraculous." He then described the extent of the initial risk and the more recent assessment, which showed possible deficit in less than 3.5% of the left side of my brain. I was impressed by the way in which the functions involved could be identified, an area that dealt with visual orientation and visual differentiation, if I recall correctly. He then said, in terms any parent would understand, "You may not be able to find Waldo anymore." If I were an architect, these faculties would be more vital, but I was unlikely to see much difference in my daily life and work. He then added, "You may have difficulty reading a map," a remark which prompted gales of laughter from Kathy and Sarah. Anna was away at this point. Dr. Reed commented that I did not realize I had said anything funny, to which Kathy responded, "That's because you've never traveled with him." In my family, my deficiencies as a navigator had prompted my unceremonious removal from that responsibility and replacement by Anna as we meandered through the streets of Milan by car in search of our hotel or even the road leading to it. As the saying goes, you can't lose what you never had. At least now I have an excuse for getting lost. My point in mentioning this conversation is not only to flag a milestone in my recovery, but also to underline how effectively information was conveyed to all of us by all involved, as well as the enthusiastic way in which we were all part of a team dedicated to my recovery and the well-being of my family and friends in this difficult experience. By the next Sunday, I was in the stroke acute care unit. The next day, Sunday, I was in the stroke acute care unit with a wonderful team of nurses who buoyed our spirits and, for a notorious early riser like myself, brightened every morning. All tests were explained and discussed. Most rules, especially those posted limits on hours and numbers for visitors, were cheerfully ignored. My wife and daughters were able to stay in a family room nearby on the same floor as the unit, which certainly eased the strain of my very long weekend in Kingston. As it turned out, I was not discharged until 10 days after the stroke, as my dosage of Coumadin was adjusted to yield the appropriate INR level. I still find it amazing that someone made the leap of logic to employ a rat poison more commonly known as warfarin so beneficially for patients with cardiovascular problems. As I got better, I was given a day pass, terminology employed at other facilities in Kingston as well, so that Kathy and I could replenish my reading materials and experience food not delivered on a tray. One of the advantages of being at a teaching hospital like KGH, of course, is that I had several neurologists who visited as well as their students. At one point during my stay, I started to write about my experience to contradict a series of alarmist reports that had appeared in the Globe and Mail earlier that summer, at least one of which had focused on problems with emergency care. Although I have not yet submitted that article, the drafting process did bring me in touch with the teaching staff at KGH, which explains this video recording. The process of thinking about what I would write, as with many scholars, there is a significant lag between thought and publication, has helped me to reflect about what I have learned along the way, quite apart from those things that I appreciate now that I might have taken for granted before, and other matters that earlier seemed significant but which I now recognize as trivial. Without presuming in any way to tread on your own areas of expertise, may I offer a few reflections drawn from what happened to me. First, my own experience is eloquent testimony to the importance of prompt action, including calling 911 and getting the victim quickly to a hospital as well as effective treatment. Administering tPA so soon, well within the limit of 3 hours after the stroke, not only saved my life but also minimized the impact of the stroke. Second, what was vital throughout for me and for my family was the profound emotional support that we received from everyone, the dispatcher, the paramedics, one of whom checked in later to see how I was doing, the security staff, the imaging technicians, the orderlies, the various specialists, the nurses, and the physicians, all of whom conveyed the impression and encouraged the feeling that we, including my family and I, were part of a team dedicated to my treatment and recovery. In other words, the qualities that we all value in ourselves and others matter a great deal in this kind of ordeal: compassion, consideration, empathy, affection, respect, and trust. I am pleased to say that I cannot attest to the impact of their absence, as these qualities were always present, but I can say that they made an enormous difference to me, to my family, and to those friends who visited. What is often forgotten in talk about budgets and wait times is how much is accomplished so well by professionals like yourselves in difficult circumstances during which your humanity shines through. As that list of personnel suggests, I would like to underline how important every aspect of the work involved has been in my case, especially in those critical first few hours. All of the developments in emergency response and treatment matter. The dispatcher, the paramedics, and the emergency staff and others at KGH all employed their skills and experience and all made a difference to the outcome. Quite simply, without your work and the research which backs it, I would not be here. It was also vital for me and for my family to know what was happening and for information to be conveyed effectively and clearly so that my family and I could participate fully in my plan of care. Again, my experience was a model of what should be done in this respect. As you know, the story does not end with discharge. I am pleased to say that follow-up scans and tests have indicated that my carotid artery has healed and have confirmed the limited impact of the stroke. I have not been able to test my Waldo hunting skills, as the girls long ago outgrew those books, and we were unable to find them in bookstores. However, I did find an Australian satirical book about the hunt for Osama bin Laden modeled on the Waldo books, and I can truthfully claim that I have been able to find Osama, at least in that context. I no longer take warfarin, though I do take other medications, Lipitor and Plavix, to avoid any problems where the artery had narrowed slightly, and to control my blood pressure I take a half dose of Atacon Plus. My condition has been monitored closely, and my employer has been understanding about necessary adjustments in my schedule, particularly in the first 6 months. Most important of all, I have indeed been fortunate, both in my family physician, Dr. Susan Wilkinson, and my neurologist in Ottawa, Dr. Mike Sharma. As a result of their attention, knowledge, advice, and compassion, my recovery continues to astound those who learn about what happened to me. But that whole process began with the initial response. Finally, even though mine was an atypical stroke with no prior symptoms or warning signs, in my case I experienced all of those as it was happening, I would still stress the importance of those signs, not only for potential victims, more numerous than we think, but also for those who may witness a stroke in progress. Above all, as my family would attest, do not believe the denials of the victim. As I said at the outset, as the victim of a stroke, I may be the least reliable witness to its immediate impact. However, as a survivor of one, I can confirm that prompt and effective treatment can make a dramatic difference. Again, I would like to thank all of you for your work and for this opportunity to underline its importance to me and to others like me. Thank you.